Ishiro Honda once said that the tragedy of monsters is the fact that they are born too tall, too strong, and too heavy. And at least in the context of the films, he was right. These attributes have led to Godzilla having many disagreements with the Japanese military. But at least in the context of pop culture, these attributes have led to the opposite for Godzilla. They've allowed him to prosper and produce 28 movies. But I want to analyze this and discover what it truly is about Godzilla that attracts people to him and why he's been so endearing. And the only way to truly do that successfully is to review every Godzilla movie ever made. Some people might be angry, but regardless, welcome to Zazubaar's Godzilla Palooza. Salutations, Infinite Islanders. I am Zazubaar, and welcome back to Godzilla Palooza. It's day 5, and today we're going to be moving on to, in my opinion, one of the most classic and greatest Godzilla films, Mothra vs. Godzilla. Yes, indeed. The 1964 film, which, in my opinion, defines the rest of the Showa series. Now, I've been saying Showa series for basically this entire series now, and I just realized that I never explained quite what I mean by that. All kaiju films and the series are broken down into mainly 3 eras. There have been further breaking downs, but basically 3 main eras. The 2 most notable ones are Godzilla and Ghidrah. There are 3 eras for both monsters, and these are the 2 most notable. The first era is the Showa era. That's around from the 60s to 70s, though we do include the 50s stuff as well. So basically all the early stuff, the first series, so to speak. Then what we reboot in like the 80s and 90s with the Heisei series. And then we reboot again in the 2000s with the Millennium series or Shinsei series. I say Millennium because why not? So that's what I mean when I say Showa, Heisei, Millennium. So Showa series is the first Godzilla series, Gojira through Terror of Mechagodzilla. So excuse me. That's what I mean when I say Showa, Heisei, Millennium. And the 2 most notable franchises that have that are Godzilla and Ghidrah. Though Godzilla has more films in each era, whereas Ghidrah only has 12 movies in total. So, you know, I mean, he has only 3 Heisei films and 1 Millennium film. So, just saying. But this is not about Ghidrah. Today we're going to be talking about Mothra vs. Godzilla. In my opinion, this is not only one of the greatest Godzilla films ever made, but this is the movie that's going to define the tone for the rest of Showa Godzilla. The way this movie is shot, the way the story is told, the way the characters are, just the way everything comes together, the rest of Showa Godzilla feels like this, in my opinion. And I said last time when we reviewed King Kong vs. Godzilla that it too was very classic and defining. This so even more, and I can't really describe what it is about it that is so defining. I think ultimately the main reason for why the rest of Showa Godzilla is like this is because this is fantastic, and they tried to recapture the same feel with the future films, and they definitely succeeded in some cases, but none of them were ever this good. This is fantastic. And of course, as always, we will get into details on why. But I just wanted to start out by saying Mothra vs. Godzilla is indeed one of the greatest Godzilla films ever made. And in my opinion, I'd put it on top 10 best kaiju films. It's one of Ishiro Honda's best films, in my opinion. It's fantastic, and we shall, of course, get into why. But the big reason for me on why it is so fantastic is because it manages to be a great film. And not in the same way as Gojira. Gojira is a very serious and comprehensive and complex piece of cinema. Mothra vs. Godzilla is different. I don't want to call it, I'm not really quite sure what to call it. It's a great movie. And the reason for that is because it manages to both be extremely entertaining, and again, not that Gojira isn't, but the thing with Mothra vs. Godzilla is, unlike Gojira, it has comedy in it, but not the same way King Kong vs. Godzilla had comedy in it. It's not a satire. It's like a good movie should be. Or at least, a movie that's trying to... I'm tripping on my words here because, again, let's forget about Gojira for a minute, because Gojira is a different thing. That's a complex and artsy piece of cinema. This is a good movie. It's not so much artsy as much as it is just a good movie, in that it manages to both be an entertaining film and a deep and interesting thematic kind of art film. But it's a little bit more mainstream than Gojira is. And what I mean is, we have a lot of scenes of lighthearted comedy and lighthearted banter mixed in with this really rather dark Godzilla story and all these dark scenes. I mean, there is a lot of funny comedy in this, and that's not a problem like it was in King Kong vs. Godzilla, where the comedy was very out of place there. This film, I feel like it's in place, and maybe it's just because this is Sekizawa's second Godzilla movie and he had kind of perfected what he was trying to do with King Kong vs. Godzilla. But if that's not it, this is just... This takes what King Kong vs. Godzilla did with its comedy and just simply makes it more well integrated. And it's funny. I mean, the big thing that jumps out to me in terms of the comedy is the way the characters are just so likable and relatable, but they're not cartoony like the characters in King Kong vs. Godzilla are. They're just well-rounded. In that they can be, not silly, but they can be comedic at points and clever and, a little bit foolish, but they're not cartoony and over the top and ultimately unrelatable like the characters in King Kong vs. Godzilla. So the film is just fantastic for that, because then it also manages to mix in these characters being so bitter and relatable and frustrated in the film. And King Kong vs. Godzilla didn't have that. So it makes these characters feel more well-rounded, and ultimately they represent the entire tone of the movie, and that we can mix in the comedy with the dark stuff as long as the film is ultimately serious. And it is. It's an ultimately very serious Godzilla film and a serious sci-fi story, which is what a great monster movie should be, and Mothra vs. Godzilla does that in droves. So it's fantastic for that main reason of it manages to be an entertaining monster and just good old movie, while also being interesting and thematic and just a deep movie. It's not just a paper-thin monster movie. It has deep depths to it, but it's also entertaining. I deeply commend it for that, and that's ultimately why I think it's one of the greatest Godzilla movies ever made. So let's get into the plot. One complaint I've been having watching some of the videos I've already done for this series is I think I go into way too much detail on the plot synopsis. And I know I said in the first episode that I didn't want you guys to have to watch the movies before you watch my reviews, and I still don't want it to be that, but I don't think I need to outline every single scene like I've been doing and still have you guys get the gist of the movie, so that way you know what I'm talking about when I review it. I just want to let you guys know what happens. So, I'm not going to go into as much detail on this one. I'm just going to give a brief overview of the plot. Basically, it goes down like this. A typhoon hits Japan, which washes ashore Mothra's egg, which was in suspended animation or something. It was basically just buried underground on Infant Island. And at the same time, the typhoon also churns up Godzilla and basically wakes him up. So when I did this for reviews to reviewers, I based the entire review off the structure of talking about how the typhoon is such a brilliant way to get the plot going. and ultimately is better than the stuff we had with King Kong versus Godzilla, where the two monsters just seem to show up in Japan at the same time for no good reason. The Typhoon is a great device to get Mothra and Godzilla together and to get the plot going. It's a great way to introduce the main characters, introduce the main conflicts of the film, and keep the plot moving. And I think it's fantastic, and ultimately is a much more clever way to bring the monsters together than simply having two separate stories about the monsters happening at the same time, like we had in King Kong versus Godzilla, where they just for no reason suddenly intersect. I like this better, and I think it's more clever, and ultimately we don't really get anything like it again, because generally now with Godzilla films after this, we're going to get some contrivance to give Godzilla a reason to fight the other monster. Usually it's either mind control, or he's just stuck where the other monster is, or there's really no reason. So we'll get that later, and I love this because it's so well put together and so well constructed and so well written. I love that Typhoon. I think it's a great way to get Mothra's egg there, to get Godzilla there, and to introduce all the main characters, and I think it's brilliant. Also, the story is very well paced. Everything moves very naturally. Like, all the scenes with the humans don't drag because it's all integral to the story. And the scenes that really aren't, like some of the comedy scenes, ultimately make the people more likable. Like the scenes in the newsroom. And it all builds up to the film's tone and atmosphere. And ultimately the story does move very well. At least for the first half. I think some scenes in the second half, like after Godzilla kills Mothra for the first time, I think the movie kind of starts to lose a little bit of that great pacing, but mainly that's because the human characters aren't on screen as much, and it's a lot of Godzilla fighting the military, and they're great scenes. I just feel like they last too long. And I almost think that they should have put the military scenes before Godzilla fights Mothra for the first time. I think the film would be much better paced for that. There's also a continuity flub. An in-film continuity flub. We'll get to Godzilla and Mothra's continuity in a few seconds, but there's an in-film continuity flub. Godzilla fights the military and combats their electrical weapons that they try to use to kill him at night, but he fights Mothra at high noon. Then all of a sudden we transition to night. Then once that scene's over, we transition back to like high noon. And that's still the main human characters waiting for Mothra's egg to hatch. It has to be the same day. Otherwise, they camped out around the egg or something. I don't know. That is a big in-film continuity flub. And it's not a huge problem. Again, the scenes with Godzilla fighting the military are epic. It's a continuity flub. That's really all I can say about it. And it does take you out of the film a little bit. Also, those scenes are not as well paced as the first half because we feel a little bit more distance from the human characters than we did in the first half. I talked about this in my reviewers, the reviewers' review of the film, but we have a sharp disconnect when we have more scenes with the monsters, and ultimately I think it has to be this way, and you can't take too much, points off in the film for it, because I think it ultimately has to be that way, but I don't know. The story isn't as well paced because, again, we feel distance from the characters. We were seeing all this from their shoes in the beginning of the film. So I think the story starts to lose a little steam for like the last 45 minutes. No, not that long even. More like the last 25 minutes. So again, I don't know if that's a problem because I can't think of a better way to do it. So, but all I can say is the film, you get a little bit antsy during the Godzilla military scenes. That's all I'm going to say. Again, they're fantastic, but you get a little antsy waiting for the plot to get going again. So again, I think the only way I can even think to fix this, and I don't even think this would do that great, is to move the military battle scenes to before Godzilla fights Mothra for the first time. And again, I don't even know if then it would work that well even. But who knows. Let's talk about continuity real quick, especially Godzilla and Mothra's continuity. I talked about that in-film continuity flub, but that's really all there is. The continuity with Mothra and Godzilla is fine, I guess. Again, I haven't seen the original Mothra film yet. Don't shoot me. I can't get my hands on it. That's probably the next thing I'm going to buy on Amazon, but because there's a great Toho 3-pack that has Mothra and 2 other films in it that I don't remember. I think it's the Mysterians and the H-Man. I might be wrong about that, but it's a Toho collection, and I do want to get that. But despite not seeing that film, I know a lot about it, and I basically know the story. So there is a little bit of continuity problems in Mothra vs. Godzilla, in that it functions more as a sequel to Mothra than it does as a sequel to King Kong vs. Godzilla. And Godzilla's continuity isn't a problem, it's just very much so that he's there. With Mothra, though, the problem is that Mothra was the monster in that movie. And despite her not being evil, she attacks for a good reason, she's still attacked. And I don't think all the people who are in this film would understand the reasons for her attacking in the original Mothra film, which were because she was trying to get the fairies back. But in Mothra vs. Godzilla, no one shows much fear for Mothra, and I think they would. People know who she is. I mean, it's not like they don't recognize the name, but I feel like there should be more fear behind it. There's only one scene where I really get an intimidating quality when someone brings up Mothra, and that's from Kumiyama and Torahata, but I just feel like that's because they're the film's villains, and someone's bringing up the fact that a monster might be pissed at them. So I think despite whatever monster it is, you'd be a little bit terrified. But when, Sakai and all these other people mention Mothra, there's really no fear behind it. It's just, oh, I know what that is. It's not a huge problem, again, but still. I feel like there should be more fear behind Mothra, and I'm ultimately not going to begrudge the film for it because, again, it's not really a huge problem. Godzilla's continuity is alright. I mean, we could have our debates till the sun goes down, even though it's night when I'm recording this, but whatever, that's just a metaphor. We could have our debates for a year about how much this ties into King Kong vs. Godzilla, especially where Godzilla is when we first see him, which is underground. Sure, you can make your arguments that, when Kong beat the hell out of him underwater, that he got knocked out, and that he's just here now because he was sleeping for 2 years. Who cares? I really don't care. Godzilla's under the sea. That's all that really matters, and the typhoon washed him ashore. Ultimately, his continuity doesn't mean diddly shit in this film. The only thing that is important and is there is people knowing who he is and showing fear when he's brought up and knowing about the radiation. That's all that we need, and it's here, and it's all, it's all there. So that's all that I really need. I don't need any specific continuity mentions. The stuff in King Kong vs. Godzilla where they brought up raids again was fine, but I don't need it here. And I'm glad it's not there. I think the Godzilla continuity that we need in this film is here, and used to good effect. And Mothra's continuity, it's not a big deal. Both monsters exist, and this movie is ultimately very standalone and better for it because of the continuity that we need from them is there. And that's all we really need is we know who those two monsters are. And we show some intimidation when we bring them up, though I think a little bit more from Mothra's side would have helped. So again, the continuity is quite good. So let's talk about the human characters. I touched on them briefly earlier, but I'll just say this again. They're all well acted, likable, and well written. Sakai especially, he's probably one of my favorite Godzilla protagonists, and the big reason is because he's this bitter, frustrated, kind of worn down city reporter trying to take down the corrupt politicians and businessmen, and I really like that. There are a lot of characters I like that are that way, like Kolchak the Night Stalker. I'm a big fan of that character, and I like Sakai because of that. Also because he may be worn down and bitter, but he still has a sense of humor. Again, there's some great comedy in this film where I especially love the scene where he gets really excited. Well, let me explain. There's a scene in a hotel where Yoka, Sakai, and Mirai are sitting at a table, and they're looking for the fairies because they've disappeared. And they start looking under the table because they don't want anyone to hear what they're saying about Mothra, and they talk under the table. And there's this great shot where Sakai gets really excited about knowing where the fairies are, and then he bumps his head. I love that, because it doesn't make them cartoony, it just makes them real. And people with a sense of humor. I also like his relationship with Yoka, because it's clear that they've known each other for a long time, and only recently has he become her boss. And I love how she calls him by his first name, and he doesn't like that because he's supposed to be her boss. And it's clear they know each other for a long time, and again, it humanizes both of them to have this kind of cool banter. I really like Mirai as well, especially in the Japanese cut. The one thing I forgot to mention earlier, we're not doing separate reviews of the two cuts for this because they're ultimately basically the same thing. There's only one notable thing that is cut out, and we'll talk about it at the end briefly. And strangely, it's actually cut out of the Japanese version, and it's in the American cut, so that's a little weird. But we're not going to do separate reviews for this, but the thing is that Mirai is a lot more well characterized in the Japanese cut. In the English cut, they turn him into this very dry, melodramatic scientist. In the Japanese cut, he's this very angry and reflective and kind of depressed character. He's got a very angry energy about him, and it's something that the American cut takes out, I guess, just because scientists have to be boring, just as a matter of principle. In the Japanese cut, he's very. I love the scene where he's talking about how he wants to go to the courts and get Mothra's egg back from Kumiyama, but ultimately he starts. He doesn't swear, but it looks like he's about to. And he just kind of goes, ah! And he just talks about how it would ultimately be pointless too, because it would take years, and by that time the egg would probably be hatched and it would all be moot. So I love Mirai. Ultimately, all the people are just very humanized, very likable. I don't have a ton to say about them. I really like the cast. A lot of them are, typical Godzilla cast. But Akira Takarada as Sakai is perfect. Blasphemy here, but I actually like Akira Takarada as Sakai better than I like him as Ogata. I think that's just because he has more of a personality with Sakai. I mean, Ogata's great, but he ultimately didn't have much of a personality in Gojira. Sakai has a lot of personality and character stuff in Mothra vs. Godzilla, and Akira Takarada is great with it. He's a great leading man, and ultimately why he's so popular, or he was so popular in Japan as an action movie and a drama actor. So he's great for that. Otherwise, the cast is great. I really wish I looked this guy's name up because he's one of my favorite Godzilla actors, but the guy who played, and if only you could comment leaving the actor's name, that'd be great, but I just didn't look it up beforehand that I meant to. The actor who played General Shinzo in King Kong vs. Godzilla, plays the general in War of the Gargantuas, and he plays the editor in this film, is awesome, and he has a very dry anger and bitterness about him that no other actor has in Godzilla. And he's ultimately one of my favorite military characters, but he also plays a really great, mean editor. He reminds me a lot of like Perry White from Superman. This very mean and more concerned with the news than the welfare of his reporters kind of editor, so I love that. And he's great with it. It's ultimately very similar to what he would do with a military general, but maybe more personified. Like, he has a lot more personality than he would with his military generals. So I love him in this with the editor. The actor who plays Mirai, I also didn't look up. The only name I know in this film is Akira Takarada, and that's just because I love him. But the actor who plays Mirai, I believe, and could very well be wrong on this, so if I am, please correct me if you guys know. I believe he was Tsukioka in Godzilla Raids Again. I could very well be wrong on that, but I think he was. And he's great too. He's also one of my favorite Godzilla actors, and he too. I think he was also in the original Mothra. I think so. Yeah, I think he was. And he also has a great role in Godzilla Tokyo SOS, which we'll get there. But he's great in that as well. So I love all the characters. I love Turahata and Kumiyama. They're these great, evil, slimy businessmen. But they don't play them as cartoony. They play them as actually very realistic, which is scary because the scary thing with this film is that it's a big criticism on... I regret to say commercialism because that's what King Kong vs. Godzilla is about, but this great criticism on big business and capitalism. And it's very well handled in my opinion. And the way Honda and Sekizawa write and direct Kumiyama and Turahata is great because they're ultimately like villains you love to hate. I love the scenes where it's just Kumiyama and Terahata arguing and talking about making money and all that. They're just these two great slimy businessmen who ultimately are very similar to real ones because they care about the bottom line and nothing else. They care about making money and nothing else. And that's ultimately where the theme and allegory of the film comes in. We'll get there in a sec. But the actors are great too. Kenji Sahara just nails. Oh, I know Kenji Sahara too, so I know two names in this movie. Kenji Sahara and Akira Takarada. But Kenji Sahara nails the slimy businessman thing. And he has this like almost sly charm about him that you know is fake, but you can't help but fall for. And he has that a lot with Torahata, and that he has to wear a fake smile a lot of the time, especially when he's talking to Kumiyama and talking to the public, especially. And it makes sense because he's the son of a big politician. So, and he's of course he's a businessman. So I love that, and Kenji Sahara sells it so well. And ultimately makes him a villain you love to hate, and Kumiyama's the same way. They both have great lines. And one of them I mentioned in my Who Reviews the Reviewers video that I love in both cuts of the Japanese and English is when Kumiyama goes, "We have our responsibilities to the public, and I'm willing to show the egg to them for a slight fee." I love that line. Again, I love the sly phoniness / charm of Kumiyama and Terahata. So now, with that said, let's get into the allegory and themes. I'm gonna sum it up like this. This is the first Godzilla film since Gojira where not only is there allegory and themes and stuff to talk about and dissect, but it's also good, and I love it because it's so well placed. I'm gonna sum it up as this: the highs and lows of humanity. And we're also going to break it back down into capitalism and big business criticism, but the big thing for me is Mothra vs. Godzilla explores the best parts of humanity and the worst parts of it. Kumiyama and Terahata are very representative of these are the bad people. The people who exploit other people and things and just care about themselves. They're very selfish and filled with duplicity. And they represent the worst parts of humanity. But then we've got people like Sakai and Mirai and Yoka, who are very, they're moral, and they care about people. And they ultimately care about, making the world a better place rather than their own selfish needs. I mean, and also I also like how Sakai, to go back to the characters for just a sec, I love how Sakai is almost ready to give up on humanity for just a second. And he's almost ready to drop the story about the monster egg, about Mothra's egg. And he does ultimately continue, but he's just like, I'm so frustrated, I'm done with this, just screw it. And it ultimately makes him feel more real. But again, back to the allegory. So the lows are the big business people who exploit other creatures. And then there's Sakai, Mirai, and Yoka who want to help other people and aren't selfish at all. The monsters are also representative of this, Mothra and Godzilla, but I like how all the elements of the plot work into the allegory and themes, because Godzilla is very much so representative of the sins of humanity. And we've talked about this before, but the sins of humanity of playing with the powers of God. Basically testing the nuclear bombs and creating Godzilla. So Godzilla is representative of that. But I think in this film we can generalize Godzilla more to be he's representative of the sins of man and the negative aspects of humanity. He's basically what's wrong with humanity. So for the first part of the film, he is the dominant monster. He just goes around destroying stuff and cannot be killed by any conventional means. But then we have Mothra. And I love the use of the egg, but we'll talk about that after we talk about Mothra herself. Mothra is very much the representative of the good parts of humanity. But she's dying. And I love that. I don't think I'm overanalyzing this. If anyone disagrees with me, you feel free to say this, but I don't think I'm overanalyzing this. I don't think it's just a plot contrivance to have Godzilla fight caterpillars that Mothra's dying. I think it's interesting that Mothra is... The good aspects of humanity are dying. They're weak. And they ultimately can't compare with the bad aspects of humanity. Godzilla. So, at first, Godzilla wins. The bad aspects overpower the good. Oh, this is just so deep. I'm trying to... There's a lot of different angles we can come in on this. There's mainly the human scenes and the monster scenes. And I love how they work together to make this allegory more pronounced. And the film ultimately, like a good allegory should, works on two levels. The basic plot side of things and the thematic side of things. And the plot moves in a way that moves with the allegory fluently. I love how the human characters first talk about this allegory, in that Sakai and Mirai and Yoko go to Infant Island to convince the Islanders to let them use Mothra for help against Godzilla. The Islanders say no at first because humanity has done nothing but hurt them. They have tested nuclear bombs on their island, and I love that because it brings Godzilla's stuff back into this. And they've also refused to give them back Mothra's egg because Mothra's egg is good business for them. So I like that they've given up on humanity completely. And it takes these three civilized people from the civilization that these islanders hate to convince them we're not all like that and we can still be saved. And so Mothra agrees reluctantly to fight Godzilla, and she fails at first. And but that doesn't mean all hope is lost. Now we've got this egg. The egg is representative, in my opinion, of hope for the future. This movie, unlike Raids Again, which had an optimistic ending for the sake of having an optimistic ending, has an optimistic ending for the sake of there's hope for humanity. We're not dead yet. It's not the apocalypse yet. In that we can look to the future with some hope that our good aspects will once again shine. That one day we won't distrust and that we won't have war anymore. That we won't be so distrusting of each other and be so regretful to help each other. We won't be Kumiyama and Terahata. That will be the Islanders, well, not the Islanders because they're distrustful too, but we won't be, that we want to be people who look after each other. We want to be Sakai, Yoka, and Mirai. We want to be people who care about each other, who care about, basically want to help each other and work towards a better world. And I think the two caterpillars are representative of that because their mother died trying to defend for those rights. So like children, human children, who are born and meant to make a better future, they're born to defeat Godzilla, representative of the bad aspects of humanity, of our sins, and defeat him so that the good aspects can shine. And ultimately they don't kill him, but they subdue him, and they go off to live happily. So I love that. And ultimately, again, the plot of the film complements the allegory in a way that King Kong vs. Godzilla didn't. So I love that. There's other things I could get into, but I think that this film is so deep that I'd have to come in from multiple different angles to fully give you the full picture of it. But basically, we can sum up the theme of the film as humanity has made a lot of mistakes, representative of Godzilla. But we shouldn't give up on ourselves yet. We always have the hope of the future. We have Mothra. And those good aspects will hopefully one day overcome the bad. And again, I like that Godzilla isn't killed at the end of this, that he's just subdued, that we still have to work a little bit. And I love Sakai's closing line. A lot of the times in Godzilla films, the closing line ruins the allegory. In this film, it complements it. Sakai doesn't come out and say, wow, we suck, we have to be better. He says this. He complements the plot of the film. He says that the Islanders did us a big favor and Mothra did us a big favor by dying for us. The only way that I can think to thank them is to work towards a better world. One where we don't trust each other. Don't distrust each other, excuse me. And he doesn't, again, it's complementing the plot and the allegory, and I love that. This is ultimately one of my favorite Godzilla films, and ultimately one of the best, because, again, the allegory comes just per quo with the plot, and that's fantastic. I don't know how long this review's getting, but it's probably getting a little long, so I think we should start to wrap this up. The other big allegory in the film, and this is ultimately a little bit more on the nose, but I still think it would have to be there for this allegory about the highs and lows of humanity to work, in that we have capitalism. And capitalism is not necessarily the lows of humanity. I mean, I live in a capitalist culture. I believe in capitalism, but not exploitation, which this film is more going after. Not exploiting another living creature or another person to make money. And Torahata does it with... Torahata and Kumiyama do it with Mothra's egg, and Torahata does it with Kumiyama. The film is ultimately about money and power versus morality and life. Torahata and Kumiyama care more about money and power. So, they do whatever they can to make money. They don't care about life or morality. And they'll exploit poor fishermen to make money, and they'll exploit an egg and island people to make money. Regardless of morality or life. I love the scene where Kumiyama offers Sakai money to get the twin fairies and have them as an attraction. I feel like, again, that's well representative of that his head is not in the right place. It makes him seem a little insane. Like, those are two living people, and you're gonna buy them just basically to use them as an attraction. I really like that, and Godzilla is very well put into this as well. It's not just the human characters that are part of this allegory. I love what purpose Godzilla serves in this, in that he's there to kill and show the people who believe in that life and morality is more important. That the people who value money and power over life are hurt and die. Kumiyama and Torahata are ultimately destroyed by themselves. Kumiyama goes to Torahata to confront him about stealing his money and about exploiting him. Torahata shoots Kumiyama when they get into a fight, and Kumiyama tries to steal all Torahata's money to get the money that he owes him back. And again, Kumiyama could have just escaped and forgot about Torahata and gone off to live a better life, but instead he decided to be a little greedy about it and go to get the money. Again, Kumiyama could have been off and escaped and been away from Godzilla, but instead he decided money over life and ultimately is killed for it. Torahata's the same way. Torahata could have escaped the hotel before Godzilla crushed it, but instead he takes the time to pick up the rest of the money and then starts to leave, and Godzilla ultimately kills him. He chooses money over life, and he dies for it. And again, I think that works well with the overarching theme of the film of the highs and lows of humanity. And I criticized the film in my reviews, the reviewers video on it, for killing the human villains of the film, and the monsters need to take center stage. I don't agree with that anymore after watching it again for this review and focusing on it more on the allegory and theme. I feel like it had to be that way, and it ultimately complements the film's allegory and theme. It may seem a little clunky in the plot, but ultimately I don't think it's a problem. I just think that it works well for the allegory and the theme. So it's not contrived at all. I think it happens naturally. So I don't agree with what I said in the Who Reviews the Reviewers video about that anymore. So I love that. That'll about do it for the allegory. Let's get into the monsters and the effects more specifically. Again, I love the allegory and theme of the film. It's ultimately one of my favorite Godzilla allegories and themes. So it also works into why this is one of the best Godzilla movies ever made. So let's talk about Mothra and Godzilla themselves. This is my favorite version of Mothra because of what she symbolizes and the way she's characterized. She's not so much this whimsical fairy creature. She's very much so just a creature who believes in the hope of life, and isn't afraid to kick some ass to make sure that prevails. I mean, she doesn't hold back fighting Godzilla. I mean, sure, she loses, but that's only because she's at like 1/3 of her power. So I love that, I love that she's not quite that whimsical goody-goody two-shoes that she's going to be later. She's this, quite badass ass-kicker for the hope of humanity who, again, isn't afraid to whoop a little butt to get humanity on the right track again. So I like that. Her fight with Godzilla is awesome and dynamic, and she ultimately proves that she can fight Godzilla, unlike what most Godzilla fans think about her. That, you know, she's just a moth. How can she possibly fight Godzilla? Well, watch this movie and you'll find out. She actually has some pretty cool moves that can ultimately thwart Godzilla. She can use her wings to create windstorms that can knock Godzilla down. She uses a poisonous powder to try and kill Godzilla. She knocks Godzilla around. She flies around fast enough where he can't hit her with his atomic blast. And she just beats the shit out of him with her wings and with her legs. And she also just drives Godzilla crazy. There's this one shot where Godzilla just can't get a fix on her, and she's just flying above his head where I love it. And their fight is ultimately really dynamic, and I wouldn't put it in one of my favorite Godzilla fights, but it's dynamic and definitely different, and we don't get it again. Godzilla and Mothra will never have a fight like this again. It's so dynamic and creative. So as we've been doing with this series, let's talk about Godzilla himself and see how he progresses here. Wait one more movie. He's gonna start progressing a lot. But in this film, it's still very similar to the King Kong vs. Godzilla characterization and the Gojira characterization of he's a force of destruction still. This is probably my favorite film that has that early Showa Godzilla characterization of he's a badass, not villain, but force of destruction who doesn't have a lot of human traits. And it's better here because all the silliness from King Kong vs. Godzilla is cut out. And ultimately, all we have with him is just, he's Godzilla, and I love it. He's just a unique badass, and I love it. And that's how I'm going to sum up the characterization for the early Showa. He's a no-nonsense, unique badass. So I love that. And I love the design for this Godzilla, and this will bring us into the effects. This is one of my favorite Godzilla suits. In terms of being more well-made and looking cooler, taking nostalgia out of it, yeah, I do think it's better than the 62 Godzilla suit, but I just have so much nostalgia and positive feelings towards the Kingoji suit that I can't bring myself to say that I like this better, but this is very well made and awesome. The thing that really sells it for me is the head and body. The head on this Godzilla is just epic. The eyes and the mouth, it's just, he looks so badass. One defining characteristic of the suit that was actually an accident was the fact that the jowls quiver whenever Godzilla roars, and it makes this roar seem mighty. It was actually a design flaw because the glue seal between the mold of the head and the rubber broke during filming, and whenever it shakes, it's actually just it moving from the fact that it's not connected anymore. But it looks awesome. It makes Godzilla's roar look mightier. Mothra looks great. The wire work with her is very seamless. Like, you never for once think that that's a thing on wires. You think that, oh, that's Mothra. It looks like she's actually flying. And her fight with Godzilla is, again, just so dynamic and creative, and it's some of Saburaya's most unique work. And versatile work. I mean, it's we don't get a lot like this again. It looks great. It's very seamless. There's really no visual flubs that I can think of. Sure, there's some double projection shots that look weird, like one where Godzilla is walking in a factory in the background, and you see a bunch of people in the foreground. And he looks very faded compared to everything else, and yeah, it looks a little dated, but still it looks epic. I love how elaborate all the effect shots are. We get a lot of scenes of the humans running around in the foreground and Godzilla moving around in the background, and he's not the main part of the shot. There's this great pan where the city of Nagoya is being evacuated, and we're just seeing this basic evacuation scene. Then it's very late. The camera pans up to the left, and from all the evacuating, and we can see that Godzilla is moving in the background, and it looks great. And again, it's very elaborate. You can tell that they really tried hard to make this movie look great, and it succeeds. The movie just looks fantastic. like King Kong versus Godzilla, this is shot in Toho scope, and it looks gorgeous for that. And it complements the epic tone of the film very well. This movie is just epic. And the final component of that is the music. Akira Ifukube's music is awesome. It's one of his best Godzilla scores, in my opinion. It's just so classic. And the opening credits, like the original Gojira, sets up the tone for the film really well. This epic, just awesome score of what will become Godzilla's more classic theme. We didn't get this in King Kong vs. Godzilla. We didn't get that classic theme. This is the birth of it. That dun, 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 dun. This is the birth of that, and oh, it's so awesome. And ultimately, I love Ifukube's music for this. Like in Gojira, it always complements the scene. Like the scene where Godzilla's fighting the military is just, the music keeps that scene moving, and it's just so cool. Same thing for when Godzilla's fighting Mothra. And for all the scenes where Mothra is being somewhat whimsical, Ifukube's score matches that as well. Despite people who make fun of it, I love the Mothra song. I think it's just so cute. And I also just think it sounds cool, and it's very like hypnotic, and I love that. This review is getting very long, so I think I'm going to start to wrap this up. I said that like 20 minutes ago, but I'm going to start to wrap it up now because it's getting very long. Again, the music is just so epic. It's some of Ifukube's best work. I highly recommend you I highly recommend you listen to the soundtrack isolated as well, because it's just so epic. I would jog. I would run a marathon to the music from this movie because it's just so hip. It's just so like powerful and keeps the scenes moving. I also like the non-use of Ifukube's music. In that there are some scenes where there is no music and it fits so well. A lot of the human scenes don't have music, and I think it works well because we're not distracted by Ifukube's score like we were in King Kong vs. Godzilla. Not having any music lets us focus on the human dialogue, and it fits the tone more. I like that there's not a lot of music in the human scenes. Also, unlike King Kong vs. Godzilla, the Japanese cut, the music complements what the characters are doing and doesn't feel out of place. So I like that. It just feels like now Ifukube knows where he wants to take the Godzilla soundtracks, and it worked for this movie. So awesome. Ultimately, this is just one of the greatest Godzilla films ever made. The plot complements the allegory and themes. Godzilla is at some of his most badass work. And ultimately, it's just a fantastic movie. It's entertaining as all hell. It's one of the best monster movies ever made. One of the best kaiju films. It's just so good. I highly recommend it. If you skip it, you have no soul and you're not a true Godzilla fan. It's just an awesome movie. Regardless of people who make fun of Mothra, she's awesome in this movie, and this movie is awesome. Just watch it. Now we're gonna go to rating. This movie is an easy 5 out of 5 for me. Now I know when I did my reviews, the reviewers' review on it, I gave it a 4 out of 5. I would ultimately have to revert back to 5 out of 5 because I think the stuff I critiqued in that review was looking at it a little bit too nitpicky, and ultimately didn't think it deserved the points I took off for what I criticized. This is not a perfect movie. No movie is, but it's fantastic. So it deserves a 5 out of 5. There's really nothing wrong with it that's going to ruin the movie. It's just a fantastic movie. It works on all the levels that a movie should work, and it's just awesome. So 5 out of 5 for me. One of the greatest Godzilla films ever made. And ultimately, it's just, I give it a 5 out of 5 also because it's so important in Godzilla's film history, because it is the thing that establishes Showa Godzilla tone. So it's important for that and deserves a 5 out of 5 for that. So before we leave today, I think I would be remiss not to briefly talk about the American cut. I didn't want to do a full review on it because it is the same movie. There's nothing really different about it. The plot is the same. There's nothing added in, really. The only thing that's added in and not cut out, this is cut out in the Japanese version. I'll talk about why in a sec. But there's a scene added in where an American military fleet, a Navy fleet, attacks Godzilla. And it's clearly all Japanese shot film. Honda and Sakurai must have had some part in filming it, because it's all new Godzilla footage. It's elaborate miniatures and, you know, explosions and all that. But it's not in the Japanese version. It's only in the American version. I ultimately I'm not sure why. I'm going to speculate, but this could very well be wrong. But I'm going to speculate that it's again, it's some Japanese, like I guess they didn't want to make the Japanese look weak, and make it seem like the Japanese have to rely on the Americans to come in and try and solve our problems, or the Japanese's problems. I'm not sure if that's the reason why, but if it is, I don't know. It's a great scene. Ultimately, it doesn't really hurt the Japanese version. If you want to see the scene, I mean, I think you could watch either cut of this movie and it'll work the same way. I think the dubbing job is great in the American version. One of the best Godzilla dubs. The film is ultimately not altered that much from its Japanese version, except for that added in a scene, and it's a great scene. And I don't miss it in the Japanese version. I think it's a great scene, and I could ultimately do with or without it, but it's great. And the American version is just one of the best Godzilla dubs. All the voice actors fit their Japanese counterparts, especially the Twin Fairies. And ultimately, I didn't watch either cut of this movie and still get the same effect of it's one of the greatest Godzilla films ever made. So, watch one of the cuts. If you're a Godzilla completionist, watch both just to get that missing scene. So I highly recommend both cuts. I give both a 5 out of 5. Get the Toho Masterworks DVD. There's a great audio commentary by Steve Rifle and Ed Godziszewski on there, talking about the differences and the production itself, and it's ultimately just great. And I highly recommend that release of the film, because you'll get both cuts, and it's like $9. So get that DVD. So that'll about do for this review. Of Mothra vs. Godzilla. So that'll about do for Godzilla Palooza Day 5. Thank you very much for watching. And we're not quite done with the year 1964 yet. This is one of the few years where we're gonna get 2 Godzilla movies in the same year. I think it's the only year, in fact, where we get 2 Godzilla movies in the same year. And it doesn't come off as rushed. But we'll talk about that next time when we get into one of the most classic and important films in Godzilla film history, Ghidrah, the three-headed monster. I'll see you tomorrow for that review. Thank you very much for watching. Sayonara.
Thank you.